Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon.
Thank you. Wow, it's good to see so many people here for this important conversation. And I will introduce the Congresswoman in a second. I also just want to extend my special thanks to Professor Michele Pistone, who's worn many hats here on campus, in the law school and across campus, but always shown an extraordinary dedication to respecting the importance and the value of the CARES Clinic, the population it serves, and immigrants from all around the world, and which truly follows our mission. And I always tell folks that we can teach people about the rules of law and torts and contracts and things like that, but a legal education without values at the core is meaningless. And Michele Pistone puts values at the core of everything she does. So I just want to give a nice round of applause for Michele. And to introduce Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, she was elected in a special election to Congress 7 years ago now, I guess, 2018, and has served with distinction. And I'm particularly happy to have her here because she has always cared so much about social justice. Earlier in her career, she was at a major law firm heading up the pro bono activity there. She had gone to Penn for law school, but we don't hold that against her. A fine credential. I will tell you, Congresswoman, that the #1 bar passage in Pennsylvania this year is Villanova law. But she has lived a career dedicated to serving, and through the pro bono work she did previously and the work she has done as a member of Congress, and in fact supporting some of the work that we have been doing, trying to bring some federal dollars to the work we do, specifically in our clinical work. I am deeply grateful for that support as well. So, you know, it is with great pride that we can have a member of Congress here to speak to us, and it is such important work, as I was mentioning before, in the context of Professor Pistone. It is a great honor to have you here and talking about such important work. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mary Gay Scanlon.
Thank you. It is my very real pleasure to be here today to really bring together a lot of different threads, being the representative for Villanova, for its campus, but also the work that I've been doing for a couple decades before going to Congress, not as an immigration lawyer myself, but partnering with immigration agencies, both in the Philadelphia region and around the country, to represent folks and to persuade private law firm lawyers to do that work with us. So went into Congress having a fair idea of how broken our immigration system is, and obviously things have not gotten any better. But then to be able to be here today, to be on campus, to see our faith communities stepping up in a way that is so important right now, because we've seen so many pillars of civil society kind of buckle or cower or not really stand up to some things that really go against what I think are deeply ingrained American values. So it's really, really heartening to see this activity today. Of course, Mother Cabrini, as the patron saint of immigration, what a perfect choice for her feast day, for everything coming together here. But we know that as an immigrant herself, she dedicated her life to providing support and spiritual leadership to newly arrived immigrants in America, something that many in this room, I know, and throughout our community have been dedicated to. I mean, the district that we are in, Pennsylvania's 5th, which is Delaware County, part of Philadelphia, part of Montgomery County, is 12% foreign-born. About half of those folks have been naturalized. The rest are in a variety of statuses: asylum seekers, undocumented folks, the whole range. And often within one household, you'll have many people with different statuses. So when we see the kind of activity that's happening nationally right now, where there is it's been stated openly that this administration is trying to scare people into self-deporting when there's been a real emphasis on visual images, sending out Dr. Phil and video cameras and such on these raids, the things that have happened with the deportation to El Salvador. We've seen an active attempt to scare people for political ends. And that's something I think we all need to be aware of and be pushing back against. With our country's history of being a place that welcomes the tired, the poor, the huddled masses, et cetera, to suddenly see it flip into this kind of rejection, and knowing that if you go to hard data, that it's completely unwarranted, that folks who immigrate to this country are A, less likely to commit criminal activity, and B, are economic boons. So, it doesn't make a lot of logical sense to be throwing up barriers in the way that our administration is at this point. As I said, this is work that I've been engaged in for some time. I think I started with the Lost Boys of Sudan, representing some of those folks, asylum seekers from all over the world. This region, our country, of course, is one that has had wave after wave of immigration. A couple years ago, I had the pleasure of showing the ambassador from Ireland around Derby, because, of course, Derby, like Villanova was established as a university for Irish descendants. We went to a lot of great Nigerian restaurants and, other African restaurants and such, because the waves of immigration keep coming, and it's one of the things that makes our country so wonderful. So to see at this point, to see our neighbors, our friends, family members, community members being vilified, and to see masked agents going into our communities and picking up hardworking people who have no criminal records, as the majority of folks who have been detained do not have criminal records. And of course, overstaying a visa or requesting asylum is not a criminal act. So this conflation and demonization of immigrants is something that it's really important that we push back against, as well as the tactics that are being used. We've been trying at the federal level, to the extent that we're able in the minority, to bring attention to these issues. So like many of my colleagues, I traveled to the detention center in middle of Pennsylvania, not western Pennsylvania, MacEwan detention center earlier this summer, and was denied entrance. So during the first Trump administration, it was the first time that ICE had ever denied entrance to members of Congress. So in 2019, we passed a law saying that members of Congress are allowed to enter a detention center without notice, in order that we can conduct oversight and make sure that things are operating smoothly. There's always been issues with detention centers. Starting back in 2003, 2004, the American Bar Association had a program that sent private attorneys out with checklists to detention centers to check and see what the conditions were, whether people had language access, whether they had access to religious assistance, whether they had access to legal assistance, which is a huge factor in whether or not people are able to get asylum or otherwise adjust their status. So to have members of Congress being denied the ability to see what's going on was a real problem, so we passed a law. Well, this summer, ICE authorities, under the direction of Secretary Kristi Noem, started denying access to members of Congress. I was turned away in August, as were others. Members of Congress have filed a lawsuit seeking to assert our legal right to go into these centers. It's working its way through the courts. And we'll see where we go with that. But in the meantime, we continue to get very disturbing reports about the conditions in those centers, about food, about medical assistance, et cetera. So we are really concerned about what's going on. And of course, overall, we're standing up with this basic idea that parts of this administration are pushing the idea that if you are an immigrant, you don't have due process rights. That's just unconstitutional, as I'm sure all of our law students know. But so there has to be due process. I often ask when I'm in a town hall or something, how many people have tattoos? You don't have to say if your parents are here or anything. But that was the basis on which many of the Venezuelan and other migrants who were sent to El Salvador earlier this year were chosen for deportation. That they had tattoos that someone in the ICE or Customs and Border Patrol hierarchy had decided, apparently without factual support, would mean that they were eligible for deportation. So if you don't have a lawyer, if you don't have due process, you can't raise the fact that, no, this is a tattoo of grandma, and you can't raise the fact that you don't have a criminal record, and you can't even raise the fact that you are perhaps a citizen, as we've seen a number of citizens detained and even some deported. So due process is important for all of us, and if anyone doesn't have it, then none of us have it, because the potential for overreach is just too great. I am thrilled to see many of the people who were at the vigil downtown earlier today, and it was really heartening because, as I said, I think it's really important that our institutions in this country are standing up for basic principles which I think cross both faith communities and constitutional and governmental communities. And I thought, as we took the Cabrini Pledge downtown, it started with affirming the inherent dignity of every person, regardless of immigration status. And that's the one that really crosses over and I think resonates, and I think I'm hoping is going to enable us to bring in more and more faith communities. We are seeing kind of burgeoning interest across faiths in standing up, and I just would encourage you to proselytize on this, to the extent that you're able. But then one of the further down is to encourage civic dialogue that places the human person and the sanctity of families at the center of policymaking, especially toward the end of meaningful immigration reform. So, hey, out of the 7 or 8 commitments that have been made today, you're already on the civic engagement one. So thank you very much for participating. I did look up the Conference of Catholic Bishops in January of this year, published Elements of Immigration Reform, Catholic Elements of Immigration Reform, and I think they provide a really excellent roadmap of where we need to go, and they're not extensive. So enforcement efforts should be targeted, proportional, and humane. So yes, we should target violent criminals who are a risk to our communities, but we shouldn't target, mom who's dropping off her kid at preschool. And it should be done humanely, not dragging people out of their cars or out of the school, et cetera. Element 2 is humanitarian protections and due process should be ensured. And that's one of the big ones that we're having a problem with right now. Element 3, long-term residents should have an earned pathway to citizenship. That's so important for so many people across our communities. They've been here for decades. They came at a time when immigration was not the hot button issue, the hot button political issue that it is today, and suddenly they are at risk. Element 4, family unity should remain a cornerstone of the U.S. system. Element 5, legal pathways should be expanded, reliable, and efficient, and I'll come back to that one. And element 6, the root causes of forced migration should be addressed. Now, the legal pathways should be expanded, reliable, and efficient. There's a fair amount of data suggesting that if we actually had functioning immigration systems and immigration courts, that it would reduce the amount of folks migrating to the country, because if the rules were clear, if the rules were enforced, then people wouldn't come with the expectation that it could be a couple decades before they have to leave. And right now the incentives are that if you manage to get in, that you can send money home to your family, you can live here for some time, that it's going to work out one way or another. Now, obviously, the tactics being used by this administration are trying to provide a very different kind of disincentive, but the idea that we could have a functioning, humane immigration system, I think, is something this drives toward. And instead of spending billions of dollars, because literally billions of dollars were put into our immigration enforcement system this summer through the big, ugly, or beautiful bill, depending on your perspective. I mean, it's billions of dollars to construct detention centers that are being run by private corporations who have an obvious incentive to detain people. It's billions of dollars that are being put into rapid recruitment of the folks who are now seeing on our streets, masked and often employing less than effective tactics in our cities. If some portion of that money were dedicated towards our immigration courts and immigration systems and reforming the laws, I think we would be a lot further down the path of having a humane and effective system. And then the root causes of forced migration should be addressed. I mean, 2019, during the first Trump administration, I traveled on a congressional delegation to the Northern Triangle countries and then to the border. It was at the time that the family separation policy was in effect, and we wanted to see why people were coming, what was happening when they came here. When we met with the State Department and NGOs in those countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, they said it takes about $600 of U.S. investment to keep someone from leaving their home country, to address corruption, to address climate change in Guatemala, the farmers who can no longer scratch out a living because the climate has changed. At the time, we heard from judges in Guatemala who were being targeted with death threats. And we heard in Honduras about a president who had served his 2 terms and was term limited, but was running again for a 3rd term. And then we heard in El Salvador, we met Bukele. It was about 2 months after he had been elected. And as we were briefed, kind of the jury was out. He had been a new generation candidate. Was he going to be a great reformer, or was he going to go over to the dark side? And at this time, it seems pretty clear with the authoritarian tactics and the places like the CICOT, yes, the CICOT place there that the folks from Venezuela were sent to, that he has gone in the wrong direction. But so there are solutions that work, and would just welcome all of your help in trying to press for those solutions rather than something that may tweet well but actually doesn't solve the problem. So again, it is a real pleasure to be with folks today. Thank you for paying attention to these issues with all the chaos and all the things going on. But as I said before, seeing the merger between the faith community, policy, the law, it's really heartening to see folks engaged, and would welcome everything you're doing. And with respect to the letters, we want to make sure we get contact information to you so that when you come up to the Hill, maybe you can come to our office first and we can help you navigate to the other offices. But it would be a pleasure to do that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So I now invite our panelists to the front of the room. We are going to begin with Dr. Sean Hannan. Dr. Hannan works on Augustine of Hippo, medieval mysticism, and the reception of both. He is the author of On Time, Change, History, and Conversion, and the co-author of Mysticism and Materialism in the Wake of German Idealism. He is an associate professor in the Humanities department at MacEwan University and the president of the Canadian Society of Patristic Studies. His current book project is entitled City of Migrants, Augustine's Theory of Migration. So, do you want to come up or do you want to stay?
Okay, thank you so much, Colleen. Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you, everyone who had a hand in making this happen. We have so many cupcakes in the back, so please, took a long time to set them up. I'm going to talk very briefly about St. Augustine and what he had to say about migrants, and maybe how we can relate that to what we're trying to say about migrants and refugees in the 21st. century. Augustine's of obvious importance to Villanova, thanks to the Institute, thanks to the order and everything else. As someone who works on Augustine, there is a risk sometimes that, we academics just argue with each other about what we think Augustine was saying. So my goal today instead is to try to shift the conversation and look at, again, what Augustine can tell us about our own context. Peregrinatio is a Latin term that Augustine uses quite a bit. And the matter of its translation is something I think we should be arguing about a little bit more. You could just render it as peregrination, add an N to the end of it, but no one talks like that, so we're not going to do that. You could translate it as pilgrimage, which I would say is the number one way that this word is translated, and that's perfectly fine. Visiting shrines as a form of pilgrimage makes a lot of sense. It's a great thing to do. My only worry with that translation is that it kind of narrows the meaning of the word a little more so than is appropriate. I think the Latin word peregrinatio can mean migration in a much broader sense. The idea of a peregrinus, or in the plural peregrini, could refer to migrants, refugees, really travelers of all kinds. And so when I make the decision to translate peregrinatio as migration, or migrancy, or something like that, it's kind of a loaded translation, right? I'm trying to shift this discussion a little bit away from pilgrimage and kind of raise some of those more uncomfortable questions about what Augustine's trying to say about migration, about human movement more broadly. Now, this is a law school, so maybe a little bit of legalese would help. Peregrinus was also a technical legal term in ancient Roman law. It usually refers to a resident alien. Another phrase for that might be someone who's a licit, not an illicit, but a licit resident or inhabitant of a certain place, like the Roman Empire, but not necessarily a citizen. And yet they have every right to be there. And so in certain phases of ancient Roman law, you have an office called the praetor peregrinus, and that's someone whose job it is to kind of help with litigation involving non-citizen migrants, right? So it's not like they had no rights or they couldn't be involved in lawsuits or things of that nature. And later, Roman law will even develop the idea of a jus peregrinandi et degendi, a right of pilgrimage and of staying, right? So not just passing through, but of dwelling. Now, one question I often get when I talk about this stuff is, were there migrants in a sense that is like our own use of that word back in Augustine's time? And I would argue that yes, there are. This kind of fuzzy map, sorry about the fuzziness, I have another map I could show you as well, gets across not just the fact that there were migrants in Augustine's time, but that they were coming across the Mediterranean, which obviously is a hot zone for migration very much in our own era. Now, what's different is that in Augustine's time, especially in the wake of the sack of the city of Rome by the Germanic leader Alaric in 410 CE, there were refugees flowing from the Italian peninsula into North Africa, which of course is where Augustine lived and where he was a bishop of the city of Hippo, which is now Annaba in northeastern Algeria. And so obviously this raised a lot of questions for people in Augustine's community, right? Are these people my neighbors in the same way that the guy that lives down the street I deem to be my neighbor, right? Do they have to be Christians to count as my new neighbors? Right? How wide of a net can I really cast here in terms of neighborliness or Christian charity, Christian love? And in books like The City of God, Augustine really argues, I would say, for a really, really broad casting of that net, right? You essentially do have to think of these migrants as your neighbors from abroad. Here's that updated map, which I made on my maps the other day. And if anyone's interested, I could send you the link. You can play around with it. But it shows you the different major corridors that applied both in terms of ancient migration, again, largely from the north to the south, but sometimes from south to north as well. And it shows you how those kind of overlap with the flow of migrants and refugees, largely from south to north today. Another example, if we're looking over towards Asia Minor, or what's now Turkey, that Augustine talks about is the experience of migrants of what we might call Roman or Italic descent who wound up in Mithridatic Pontus. You don't need to know what that is, but all you need to know is it wasn't part of the Roman Empire. And they were treated as migrants and refugees in that other sort of polity, right, under that other form of government. And they could be persecuted too. And I bring up this example because sometimes people want to say, well, no, these were just populations moving around within the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire is a country somewhat analogous to a modern nation state. Obviously, these are highly anachronistic comparisons. But with the case of Roman migrants living outside of the Roman Empire, we have a really good example of what, by modern standards, we might consider international migration, right? And this idea that there should still be rights for people outside of the empire, and conversely, for people coming into the empire from beyond it. Ultimately, what I'm arguing here, and I'll just start to wrap it up now, is that for Augustine, in texts like The City of God, what he really wants to do is make us all sort of think of ourselves as migrants, right? We're all sort of on the move. We're all in search of a homeland. That kind of becomes his sort of spiritual model for the human being. But at the same time, he never wanted it to be just a metaphor, right? Because there's a problem here, and sometimes you see this in some of the medieval authors I read, like this one guy, Hugh of St. Victor, who says, well, when we use this Augustinian model of peregrinatio, really what we should think of is the scholar in their study who doesn't actually have to travel anywhere, but they can travel in their own minds by reading books from around the world. And I think that gets it kind of wrong, right? It's not that professors are the true migrants because we travel within our own intellects or something. I think for Augustine, the reality of human movement was something that we should never lose sight of, and showing charity for actual migrants was in some ways the best way to embody your own understanding of yourself as a migrant in this world. Again, this doesn't have to be at the expense of pilgrimage. This image here, some of you might recognize it, is from the National Shrine of St. Rita of Cascia down on Broad Street, right? And it's a depiction of Augustine that I think sort of speaks to these core Augustinian themes of charity and openness, not just to so-called, European Christians or Western Christians, but really thinking of Augustine within his own context as an ancient African thinker who, when he thought of migrants or refugees arriving from outside, he was thinking of people from what we would now call Europe coming down to his continent. And what did he recommend? He recommended welcoming them as neighbors from abroad. And I think that's something worth reflecting on more here in 2025. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hannan, for that insight into how Augustine might have thought about migration. Our next speaker is Dr. Joseph Lennon, who is the Emily C. Riley Director of the Center for Irish Studies at Villanova, where he is also Associate Dean, Professor of English, and co-director of Villanova's Strategic Initiative for Climate Justice and Sustainability. His forthcoming book, Fasting Artist, Marion Wallace Dunlop and the Origins of the Hunger Strike, will be published by SUNY Press in 2026. He publishes and is editing a forthcoming issue of the American Journal of Irish Studies on sustainability in Irish culture. Dr. Lennon is going to speak to us today about the history of immigration here at Villanova and with the Irish Augustinians. So thank you, Dr. Lennon.
Thank you, Colleen. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Representative Scanlon, for being here. It's wonderful to see a lot of friends and people from all over. And congratulations to Michele and to everyone on the Cabrini Institute. I want to say just a few words about Villanova. Michele asked me to speak a little bit about why Villanova was founded, where it was founded, when it was founded, for whom it was founded, and by whom. So I'm going to try to do that all in a few minutes. Undoubtedly, I'll skip over some things, but we were founded out here, and this is the Bel Air estate, which had been owned by John Rudolph. That was purchased in 1841 by some Augustinians, Father Patrick Moriarty and Thomas Kyle, who had come from Dublin and Carlow in Ireland. In 1796, the province of St. Thomas of Villanova had been founded, and they built a church in Philadelphia. So why were they buying this land out here, far away from Philadelphia? It's farther back then than now. They purchased the school for $18,000, and the first Mass was celebrated here in 1843. So one reason that they were coming out here was that there were many, many immigrants coming in from Ireland, as well as other places, but they were particularly interested in the Irish at that time. The immigrants had been coming in the 18th century and were increasing in the early 19th century. St. Augustine's Church, founded in 1796, was the center of this activity in Kensington. There were half of the population of the church in 1838 were Irish born. Only 1/6 of the population were born in the area. So it was a church for immigrants by immigrants. And here's a picture of the chapel, which is no longer standing, but which was right up the hill over there and built in 1844. So the question again, why did they build this chapel? Well, one major reason was there was a rise in anti-immigrant, anti-Irish, anti-Catholic sentiment in the 1840s. And they knew that coming out here was a place to establish a second school, a college. They had an academy that was founded in 1811 in Philadelphia that was adjacent to the church. In 1844, the nativist riots broke out, and these were anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, and anti-Irish riots. They began right at the foot of the church, and the debate, the flashpoint debate, was about which Bible should be taught in the public schools. Should it be the Douay Catholic Bible or the St. James Protestant Bible? And the question was really the surface level excuse for a lot of anti-immigrant dehumanizing rhetoric. So the church was burned down. The military had been called out to quell the riots. And I want to show you a few images from the time. This is an image from about the riots from 1844, in which you see the military and the Know-Nothings. The Know-Nothings were a party that were founded as an anti-immigrant party, as a way to protect, this is the term, Native Americans back in the 1840s. At the center of the church, one of the central activities of the church I want to mention was music. And to see a place that had been a center of joy and hope and spirituality turned into a place that was burned and a center of a riot was not only disconcerting, but demoralizing. Many people argued that the riot had been spontaneous and it had arisen out of just tensions when Irish Catholics were heckling the speakers at this event. But many people came, as this image shows, prepared with their weapons for battle. This is another image of the riots that shows the dehumanizing rhetoric. And I'm going to show you some other images of Irish Americans at the time that were popular in the press. Now, if you're out at Villanova right now, the Irish are celebrated, but they were not always celebrated. And these are some images of the Simian Irish, who were equated with African Americans as being evolved just barely from apes. So it was very, very ugly rhetoric, and the imagery here focused on the brutality of the Irish. And it was a way to take a sliver of something and turn it into this dehumanizing rhetoric where people were no longer people. They were not here for good reasons. They were here to grab what they could. The Augustinians saw it differently. They were very welcoming, and they saw how many people needed refuge, needed hope. I saw somebody's sign that said, "The Holy Family were migrants." And that's really a message that was paid attention to then, and one that I think we have to pay attention to again. There is a cry of help that's coming. After the Villanova College was founded, that's when the Irish famine began in Ireland. And the population went from 8 million to 3 million over 6 years. So there was a lot of death, but there was a lot of emigration also. So the Irish came, and where did they come? In Philadelphia. They and their children found refuge with the Augustinians, and the first generations of students were second generation Irish and first generation Irish at Villanova. So in 1842, the college was officially opened. It closed in 1844 as funds were diverted to rebuild the church. And then it reopened in 1843. It closed again, it reopened in 1845. Reopened in 1846. It closed again during the Civil War, from 1857 to 1865. This is the picture that you might begin to recognize the Villanova of today. This is Villanova from 1890. You can see St. Thomas of Villanova and our Alumni Hall, the structure of it there. The church and, the Augustinians had financial difficulties in the late 19th century. And I want to point out one thing that is, I think, something that was often lost in the footnotes of history, is that a family who lived on these grounds where we are seated right now, William and Julia Molden and their family, they donated their estate, which was worth $14,000. And they were freed African Americans who had been freed and lived their whole lives in this area. When they died, they passed that on to the Augustinians, and that helped in very difficult times. So we owe this university our origins to immigrants, to African Americans, to people coming to this country with hope, and to the Augustinians for their dedication. So if you are interested in more, there is an online exhibition on this topic in Falvey Library. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lennon. So I now bring forward Sister Christine Marie Baltas, MSc. She is a missionary sister of the Sacred Heart, the religious community founded by St. Francis Cabrini. Sister holds a Bachelor of Science in Education from Cabrini College and a Master's in Education from Fordham University. She has been an educator for all of her religious life, serving in Cabrini missions throughout the United States as a teacher and administrator. She served as Dean of Students at Cabrini College from 1983 to 1987. She is now semi-retired and is involved with the Cabrini Alumni Association, focusing on working with schools in Chester County and Montgomery County that have large immigrant populations. Sister is honored to share information about Mother Cabrini's work with immigrants in the United States. And I'll just say personally, I met Sister last year when we were doing a Mother Cabrini book club as a way to learn more about Mother Cabrini here at Villanova, given that the Cabrini campus will open in next fall. And it's been a real honor to get to know Sister, and I'm very grateful for her comments today.
Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be with you today to celebrate our special saints, and I would like to thank Michele Pistone for her kind invitation. I'd like to start by asking you, how many of you saw the Cabrini movie? Put your hands up. Good, very good. And if you didn't, you've got to see it. Okay. I have a few questions for you to think about. Do you know of a saint who was deathly afraid of water, yet crossed the Atlantic Ocean 23 times? Do you know of a saint who carried a business card and who had a checking account? Do you know of a saint who dodged a bullet riding on a train through the Southwest? Travel is not for the faint of heart. Do you know a saint who crossed the Andes Mountains riding on a mule? As a response to any of these questions, I'm going to share some information about a remarkable woman, St. Frances Cabrini, patron saint of immigrants. Mother Cabrini's dream began when she was a little girl, hearing stories of the great saints of the church being read by her papa as the Cabrini family gathered around in the evening in front of the fireplace. She was enthralled, hearing the stories about faraway places where brave missionaries dared to go to bring the gospel message. One missionary made a particular impression upon Francesca, and that was St. Francis Xavier, who sailed from Spain to India and Japan, and later to the entrance to China. This great Jesuit had been missioned by St. Ignatius Loyola, his religious superior and founder of the Jesuits. His labors bore much fruit, and thousands learned about the message of Jesus. Francesca wanted to follow in his footsteps. She too would be a missionary and bring Jesus to China. A visit to Pope Leo in 1889 was to forever alter her plans, and her true mission was about to begin. Millions of Italians were emigrating to America to escape poverty, unemployment, and the hardships of life in Italy. Encouraged by the American dream, families boarded ships, taking with them bare necessities and perhaps one or two treasured possessions. Upon their arrival at the port cities of America, they encountered difficulties they could never have imagined. Yet there was promise of a new life in a new land, where the willingness to labor, even under the most dire and dangerous conditions, could in time reap benefits. The famous words, "Not to the east, but to the west," coming from the mouth of the Vicar of Christ, was enough to alter Cabrini's long-cherished dream and change the course of history. Cabrini's arrival, along with 7 sisters in 1889 in New York City, marked the beginning of a missionary life that would take Cabrini across the Atlantic at least 23 times. She was petite, suffered frail health, had little money, and she didn't speak English. Yet she was motivated to go where the immigrants were, to lift them up, to educate, to motivate, to encourage, to seek justice for those who were trying to survive in a new country. In New York, schools, hospitals, and orphanages were open to serve the physical, spiritual, and educational needs of the Italian immigrants. Visits to the inmates at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York, were undertaken to bring comfort and healing to those who were imprisoned. The sisters were able to speak to the Italian inmates in their native tongue. And by the way, they had a special program and they dedicated it to Mother Cabrini. And we have a copy of that program in our holdings at Cabrini. In 1890, the murder of Police Chief Hennessy in New Orleans was blamed on the Italians. About a dozen innocent Italians were accused of the crime and were publicly lynched. When Mother Cabrini became aware of this, she knew she had to go to New Orleans. The sisters found out that their countrymen there were suffering in many ways. The mission began with the opening of a daycare center and an orphanage in the French Quarter. The sisters also traveled outside the city to the surrounding plantations, where they found Italians who had replaced the slaves, laboring under abysmal conditions. Chicago was a place where many Italian immigrants had migrated. Following their path, Cabrini set out in 1891 to open schools and hospitals that would serve this community. Often those who spoke only Italian refused to go to a hospital, even when they were seriously ill, because of the language barrier that existed between them and the medical personnel. Mother Cabrini opened schools in Newark, New Jersey, and Scranton, Pennsylvania from 1898 to 1899. Immigrants labored in the coal mines of Pennsylvania. Many died or were permanently maimed because of the unsafe and dangerous conditions under which they labored. Their families would be without any resources for their survival. Italian men headed west to work on the building of the Transcontinental Railroad and to work in the mines of Colorado. The needs of the Italian immigrant families were again obvious to Cabrini. And so in 1890, Cabrini built Queen of Heaven Orphanage in Denver, which was built to accommodate hundreds of girls. The girls were not only educated in the basics, but were taught marketable skills so that would enable them to find meaningful employment when they left the orphanage. Cabrini did not want them to fall prey to those who would take advantage of them. Los Angeles was a port city where immigrants disembarked in significant numbers. They labored on the farms and did other menial jobs without the benefit of decent housing, education, and health care. Cabrini could not turn her back on them. Once again, relying on divine intervention, she sought the means to offer them the help they needed by first opening a sanatorium for those suffering from tuberculosis. Later, she opened a school in Burbank and an orphanage in Los Angeles. In 1903, Cabrini's travels took us to Seattle, where she established an orphanage, school, and a temporary church for the Italians. There, she personally supervised at the construction site. One day, taking a pick, she began to loosen the soil, saying that a true missionary must be able to do any kind of work. It was in Seattle in 1909 that Cabrini became a naturalized United States citizen. In all her undertakings in the United States, Europe, Central and South America, Mother Cabrini emphasized the purpose of mission, saying, "Try to have the interests of Jesus at heart. Make an effort to see that Jesus is known and loved." This was always her clear-cut agenda. In whatever works they might undertake, the sisters were to be the bearers of the love of Christ. This continues to be our mission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sister. And last, we have Professor Michele Pistone. She is the founding faculty director of the newest institute at Villanova, the Mother Cabrini Institute on Immigration. And as a member of the team of the oldest institute at Villanova, the Augustinian Institute, we want to give a warm welcome to Michele Pistone.
Thanks. Well, I am beyond thrilled to be able to stand here today and welcome you all, and I love the energy in this room. The Mother Cabrini Institute was born with the intention of bringing to life each of the three words in our university motto: Veritas, Unitas, Caritas. Veritas, St. Augustine, the eternal pilgrim whose journey reflects the spiritual and human migration toward the city of God, and who guides the pursuit of knowledge and faith at Villanova. Unitas, Pope Leo XIV. A voice for unity in a divided world, calling the church and humanity to come together in compassion and shared purpose. The church, like a mother, accompanies those who are walking. Where the world sees threats, she sees children. Where walls are built, she builds bridges. She knows that her proclamation of the gospel is credible only when it is translated into gestures of closeness and welcome. And she knows that in every rejected migrant, it is Christ himself who knocks at the door of the community. And third, Mother Cabrini. Cabrini was a visionary. She was a social entrepreneur, a woman of action. I feel so honored to be able to work in her name. She turned that action into compassion with concrete change, transforming the lives and shaping a more human world. And I can't wait to learn more stories about her from you, sister. This is what Pope Leo said about her the other day in his statement, Dilexi Te. Saint Frances Cabrini, born in Italy and a naturalized American, was the first citizen of the United States of America to be canonized. To fulfill her mission of assisting migrants, she crossed the Atlantic several times, and now we just learned that she was afraid of water. Armed with remarkable boldness, she started schools, hospitals, orphanages from nothing for the masses of the poor who ventured into the New World in search of work. Not knowing the language and lacking the wherewithal to find a respectable place in American society, they were often victims of the unscrupulous. Her motherly heart, which allowed her no rest, reached out to them everywhere in hovels, prisons, and mines. In the holy year of 1950, Pope Pius VII proclaimed her patroness of all migrants. And it's such an honor to be able to work in her name. So what will the Institute do? We're going to be working on teaching. So teaching people about migration, forming minds and hearts through education and education that cultivates empathy, intercultural understanding, and social responsibility. We're also going to be working on research, generating knowledge that reveals the realities of migration and supports evidence-based solutions for inclusion and justice. We're also going to work on advocacy, raising voices like we're doing today, and influencing policies to protect the dignity and gifts of migrants and refugees everywhere. And we're going to work in service with migrants and refugees, acting directly and compassionately with migrants and refugees to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate them into communities. The Mother Cabrini Institute brings to life the values of Veritas, Unitas, Caritas, mobilizing hearts and minds for migrants and refugees around the world. And this is our first event on campus, but we had an event last month in Rome, and we brought 250 people together, academics, practitioners, refugees and migrants themselves, to a conference that launched our first project called Refugees and Migrants in Our Common Home. And the group of us had an audience with Pope Leo. And I was able to give him a copy of the artwork of St. Augustine. And this is what he said to us when we met. As you continue your gathering, I would like to suggest two themes that you might consider integrating into your action plans: reconciliation and hope. One of the obstacles that often arises when dealing with difficulties of such great magnitude is an attitude of indifference on the part of both institutions and individuals. My venerable predecessor, Pope Francis, spoke of the globalization of indifference, where we become used to the suffering of others and no longer try to alleviate them. This can lead to what I have previously referred to as a globalization of powerlessness, in which we risk becoming immobile, silent, perhaps sad, thinking that nothing can be done when we are faced with innocent suffering. So I'm here to tell you that the Institute is not going to be powerless. We're going to be a powerful force where we're going to educate, we're going to research, we're going to advocate for, and we're going to serve with migrants and refugees. So I want to share a video from our conference. Wait, click again. So as we said, it's open and growing. And so click on, take a picture of this if you want to join our community. And if you want to help the Institute, there's a form on our website where you can tell us about yourself and tell us how you want to get involved. Because our goal is to figure out ways to include everyone in this room and more in this work. It's a big project, and we need boots on the ground and everyone to be energized and supportive of it. So thank you so much. I'm turning it back to Colleen.
All right, thank you. My role as moderator is very simple because we had such good presentations. There's no time for back and forth. So that means I'm going to open up to the audience to ask for any questions that you may have. Yeah. There's one over there. Okay. Oh, I know this face. One of my students.
Hi, sorry. Hi, I'm Brooke. I'm a freshman here at Villanova, and I was just wondering what you guys think the biggest lesson we can learn from Mother Cabrini is. Give me you in the middle.
Question, Brooke.
While they're gathering, well, Sister's gathering her thoughts, I would just say the positive vision of immigrants, and this was something that was echoed at the conference, that immigrants are not only fleeing in desperation, but they are bringing messages of hope, endurance, solidarity, many other positives. So that would be one thing.
I think going back to the Mother Cabrini's main mission, and that was to bring the love of Jesus to the world. And if you can bring joy and hope by a simple gesture, a kind act, whether it's to an immigrant or just to anybody that comes across your way, this is bringing the love of Christ to the world. You might not preach it, you might not say a word, but it will make a difference in somebody's life. So that's what I would encourage all of us to try to do every day.
And I would add that I love the fact that she didn't take no as the final answer. I feel like if you haven't seen the movie Cabrini, you should. And you'll learn this woman is just she's petite, but she's strong, and she's powerful, and she is a change agent. And I feel like that's one lesson, especially for young women in the room, that this is a woman who can be a role model for everything that we can do to make the world a better place.
She didn't let anything stop her, whether it was to, grab a shovel and start digging in the soil. She had the sisters mining for gold out in California. In Colorado. In Chicago, she was having a hospital built, and she felt that the builders, she was being cheated. So she had the sisters go out early in the morning, and they were measuring the property. And cops saw them and said, what are you ladies doing? And found out that they were being cheated of about 12 feet of land. She barged into the Italian Senate, and that's in the movie. And that was a fact that I didn't know until I saw the movie, and then I did some research, and one of our sisters in northern Italy produced a newspaper clipping that talks about how she went into the Italian Senate. She barged in and demanded that the Italian Senate support the immigrant community in the United States. So she was a woman who was indomitable.
Other questions? Right, over that way. Oh, there.
I'm not a student, but on behalf of students, how could students get involved with the Cabrini Institute going forward?
Well, if you go to this, use the QR code to get to our website, and there's a form on the website that you can fill out. Right now, just give us your name and your email address, and we'll be in touch. There's Paola's in the room, and she's working with me. She's a PhD student, and we have a whole cadre of people who are figuring out how we can engage the community in our work. So let us know. So the first step is identify yourself, and then we'll be in touch. But just to know that it's really right now, me and Robin, who's in the first row. So we're waiting for our team to be built. So if you don't hear from us in the next week, you know why.
Oh, up here. And if you could introduce yourself before you ask your question, please.
Hi, my name is Siddhant. I'm a grad student here at Villanova. And I guess I was just trying to think, how do we kind of broach this sort of modern nativism that we're seeing in America, specifically coming from the top of our government down? Obviously, we're talking a lot about expressing love to those who are immigrants, which is a fantastic thing, but how do we talk to those who don't want to hear it, who are the ones saying that we should be deporting all these immigrants?
So I think that's a great question. And I mean, that's one of the things that Pope Leo is asking us to do. He asks us to focus on hope and reconciliation. So I feel like as a community, we need to start learning more about the practice of listening, about synodality, about how to have conversations across difference. And that's one of the things that the Institute is going to work on. We're already connected with the Peace and Justice Education, the Office of Peace and Justice Education, which is focusing on how to teach synodality and how to use those tools so that we can learn how to listen, how to react, and how to talk across difference.
I would add that sometimes behind that nativism is fear, and understanding what that fear is about and having conversations about common values tends to be an opener. I would also say that something that was echoed at the conference and that Pope Leo has stressed is that we should be emphasizing the positives that come from immigration and the positives that immigrants bring to communities, as well as, I mean, I think it's very important, Villanova has always done this, but that we celebrate, our foundations, and we celebrate what brings us together.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Holly Havens. I'm an alum of Cabrini University and president of our Alumni Association. And first, I just want to say thank you so much to Villanova for creating the Mother Cabrini Institute on Immigration and for taking such loving care of our new campus. And we are so excited about this bridge that we're building between our two universities. We mentioned the Mother Cabrini movie, and I think Sister Christine has seen it more than anybody. 7 times? 6? 7. She'll watch it tonight. It'll be 7. But myself and my friends who watched it, the way the immigrants in the movie were treated, the Irish, the Italian, the Jews, the Polish, the horrible things that were being said about them are actually being said today, but directed toward the immigrants of color. And all the movie gave me hope and also brought me great sadness that we've now just moved that discrimination to another group of people. And I'm wondering, my question is, with the Mother Cabrini Institute from the education side, will there be a focus on educating children? Because I think children see what's happening on the news, they see what's happening with this administration, and how can we help educate the young minds, especially the children, about the positives and the benefits of the immigration in this country?
Yeah.
There's a new primary education major that's going to be based out at Cabrini for Villanova and the College of Arts and Sciences. That's one thing, but.
Yeah, and we were also, people from the Department of Education and Counseling came to the conference in Rome. I think there might be people in the room from So yes, right? Like that's what we need to do. We need to think about how to start forming hearts and minds when they're young. I teach religious education to first graders, and Elise is here in our parish, and like we're trying to think about how to bring it to life in every grade of religious education, but also in non-religious education. Right? This is about humanity.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, there's one in the back.
There's two hands.
Hi, I'm Ava, and I'm a freshman. And I just wanted to ask, how do you think Mother Cabrini would approach the nature and negative connotation of immigration in our country today?
That's a loaded question. I'm not sure that I really have an answer to that, but reflecting back on the fact that she was a woman, she was so determined, she was so passionate, she was a gutsy lady, and I'm heartened when I hear congresswomen speaking out. You hear in the news reports, there are a cadre of women in Congress who are very outspoken, who are very unafraid to speak their mind, and so I applaud them. I think I'm deviating from the question, but what was the question? How would she feel about today? I think she would feel as she did in the past. She might use different means to communicate, to get in touch with, to travel. But I think the message and her spirit, her reliance on her faith and her trust in the Lord, I think that would bring her a long way. She wouldn't be afraid. I think she would not be afraid. She wasn't afraid then. I don't think she'd be afraid now to take on the powers that be and to tell it like it is, to call it for what it is.
I'm going to invite Jenny Grabelski to hand out a letter that Sister brought here, and it's a letter that Mother Cabrini wrote about Italian immigrants. And if you read that letter today, you'll see that you take out the word Italian and you put in another immigrant group, and it's the same rhetoric. And so just to kind of be sensitive to that and recognize that we're all immigrants, that we all could be in that story. We all were in that story at one point. And the fact that I think she leads with love is just such an important thing and message for us as well.
Her Mother Cabrini's philosophy of education is very much in alignment with St. Augustine. She speaks about the education of the heart and what that means, her philosophy of education. But it extended not only to the classroom, not only to the teacher-student relationship, but in any of her institutions that she opened, she wanted the employees, the staffs, to be imbued with that spirit, to be a loving presence to those with whom they come in contact. And I think that that's what she would very much advocate today. Besides being feisty and gutsy and indomitable, she was also tender and loving, and very much especially with the children.
Thank you. So very important, serious topics that we can also approach with joy and hope and love, and a little bit of levity. So you might have noticed there are many balloons, which you might have found surprising for a panel on immigration. Today, November 13th, is Mother Cabrini's feast day, but it is also Augustine's birthday. Augustine was born November 13th, 354, so that makes today his 1,671st birthday. And as Sister was saying, the fact that Augustine and Mother Cabrini both care about the education of the heart is something that we really want to recognize and cherish here at Villanova of these two important saints coming together. And so Michele and I hope that in the future, we plan in the future, we will have more celebrations connecting their feast and birthday in coming years at Villanova. But for now, thank you so much to Congressman Scanlon, to our wonderful panelists, and we invite you to stay for the reception, to keep asking your questions, find out more about how you can get involved in our institutes, and enjoy the cupcakes and treats we have in the back of the room. So thank you so much for coming. It's been a joy to have so many of you here.
That was great, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.